Welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast with your host, award-winning author Paul C. Thornton, a weekly conversation with the amazing cruisers featured in the Joy of Cruising trilogy, comprised of The Joy of Cruising, Cruising Interrupted, and new release, The Joy of Cruising Again. Each book is a compilation of features about cruisers and cruise and travel personalities from around the world. It's the next best thing to cruising, hearing about cruising from the unique and diverse perspectives of Paul's amazing guests.
Hello, passionate cruisers. This week on the Joy of Cruising podcast, I am delighted to welcome Neil Gregory, the subject of the feature called Ship Diaries in the new release, The Joy of Cruising Again. Neil is from the United Kingdom. The actual cruise ship diaries are exactly what it sounds like. A diary of a cruise ship employee who worked on Princess Cruise Lines as a videographer for 7 years. The diary is raucous, raw, and laugh out loud funny. For Cruise Ship Diaries in The Joy of Cruising Again, I interviewed Neil and told the backstory of the man depicted in his diary, and I quoted liberally from his diary. The quotes are raucous, raw, and laugh out loud funny. Neil, welcome to the Joy of Cruising podcast.
Hey, Paul, how's it going?
Pretty good. I'm trying to follow you, trying to get the hang of this podcast thing. I've enjoyed listening to yours.
Yeah, it's been strange. I mean, sadly, the reason we kind of found each other online was from my old cruise blogs that you started following. And yet, since I've started doing my own podcast on films and TV stuff, I've not really had time to keep up with that, sadly.
Well, I tell you, I feel a little bit sheepish because, when I found out that your podcast was all about movies, I thought I would just, eat it up. I'll be honest with you. I used to own a chain of video stores.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and up until the early 2000s. But what I find when I listen to your podcast, a lot of the new movies, I just don't know anything about. I used to, when I owned the stores, I used to watch a movie literally every single night of the week. And now my movie watching habits have changed drastically. And when I listened recently to your top 10 of 2022, and I had only seen about 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, it's I'm kind of at the stage at the minute where I'm lucky I have the time, and I am like this week, for example, I will be going to the cinema 4 times in 6 days.
Wow,
which is yeah, it's a little bit insane.
I can't tell you. Oh, yes, I can. I did. I've been to the theater 1 time since the COVID shutdown ended.
Yeah, I think it's the same. My parents, I think my dad's been once, my mum's not been at all, and I think it's just that kind of getting people back out there. I mean, we're lucky that the cinema, our local cinema, it's not that busy. If you don't go on peak times, I'll always go, if there's a new film I want to see on a Friday night, I'll go to the latest possible showing. And you could be getting out of there at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. But because we're quite a small town relatively, you don't get that many people going to the late showing. You don't get kids in there because they'd rather be out on the town. And the older people, it's too late for them. So you kind of find it's your proper sort of cinema going audience who really want to see the film for the film that go to these, so it's good.
Well, I've kind of gotten ahead of myself. We'll chat a little bit more about the podcast in a minute. But
no worries.
Let's start by, first of all, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. I'm really busy. I think last time we spoke, I'm always pretty busy because, like I say, my day job at the minute, I'm a video editor for a TV station in the UK. But since then, I kind of got all these other kind of like freelance jobs that come up and new opportunities are coming out here and there. And it's just trying to balance all these different things at once at the moment. So it's busy, it's good. And I'm just looking forward to a little bit of free time over the summer.
So let's get to the main topic of our discussion. Tell the listeners why you started working on cruise ships.
Well, I mean, I was about 3 years out of college and I really needed a full-time job. So I'd never cruised before. I'd never been on a cruise ship. I didn't really have any pull to work at sea or any real interest in it. But my mindset at the time was I needed a full-time job. And I'd been working as a cameraman for lots of really terrible pop festivals for a couple of years. You know, we'd be really busy between kind of June and September every weekend. But then even our boss would be working pub and bar jobs come winter, and it wasn't, you know, regular work. And I was just like, do you know what? I need to kind of get out. I need to have my own space. I need a proper job, as it were. That first kind of big, you know, job. And I applied for a bunch of jobs online, and the two that got back to me was Princess Cruises and a camera position for a home shopping network in Birmingham. And I just looked at the two and I thought, well, you know, whichever one I get the interview with and whichever one takes me, that's the one I'm going to go to. So even when I kind of knew I was going to have an interview with both, I still was like, well, you know, it's just whichever one, really. I didn't have any preference, which if you think back now, that's crazy. You immediately, of course, you should take the job on the cruise line at that age. But I was just, for me, whichever one got back. And luckily it was Princess who got back to me first.
So talk about leading up to the applying to Princess.
Yeah, so I had my interview down in Southampton, and it was a weird one because it was kind of like a group interview, and it was weird because you're sitting there and they kind of let slip that only one of us was going to be getting the role at the time as well. So this is where we're in the UK. It was at the time it was Carnival UK down in Southampton. You would go and have the interview with. And they kind of showed us a bit of a video of the kind of stuff we'd be making, which would have been the old Reflections DVD that Princess made. And, you know, the lady doing the interview walked out the room, and me and three other guys were just sitting there and we're like absolutely taking the video apart and, oh, this is terrible. That's really bad. Then she walks back in the room and she says, oh, so what did everyone think? And I'm the only person who put my foot in. He said, well, you know, I don't think that's very good here. There's no consistency between videos to here. The fonts, you know, looking at this, I wouldn't know these videos are from the same overall DVD. You know, everyone's looking at me like I'm crazy. But I think that was because earlier on they gave us a technical questionnaire, but it was more to do with SLR cameras than it was video cameras. I'm looking at this going, well, I don't know half the answer to this. I've never picked up a SLR in my life. I'm completely out of my depth. I'm not getting a job. So because of that, I just relaxed and I was a bit more honest because of that. And I think that's helpfully what got me the job in the end.
Now, you had some background that enabled you to critique the videos, right? What's your background leading up to the application process?
Yeah, so when I left school originally, I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to be a guitarist. So I'd done all my guitar exams. I'd gone to college and done well. When I say gone to college, it was like a day at a college to take the exam. So I'd kind of got guitar grades in classical and electric. But of course, back then in 2001, 2002, there was no kind of pathway into that as a career in the UK. You do that. You want to do that now. You go to uni. You can learn music production, marketing, all that side of it, you know, recording. You can learn how to make it a career, but that wasn't really on offer. So I kind of bummed around in bands with my friends for a little while, and it got to the stage where I started making videos for them. And then I was working at McDonald's as well part-time, and an opportunity come up where they needed a video done for a local competition. There was an internal training competition that they did where every restaurant in the country had to kind of prove to corporate what they were doing that was great in their community. And my boss, local boss, he had the idea that we wanted to do a video diary, and it would include interviews with the editor of the local newspaper, the mayor of the town, and a park cleanup by a bunch of local school kids. And he was looking at it, and he said to me, because he said, well, you're doing film at college. How much, do these guys charge? And I said, well, I don't really know. And then he went off and tried to get quotes, and they all charging him, thousands upon thousands for it. And then he didn't really want to pay that out. So he goes, well, you're doing it. Why can't you do it? And I said, well, I can, but I'll need a couple of days off work to go and shoot it. And I need a tripod. So he paid for me to get a tripod. And yeah, we went out and shot it. And it was great because I got paid to basically have a week off work and shoot and edit this video. And yeah, it was great. And it actually, when it came round regionally for the regional competition, it won the regional competition. And then it went up to the big one in London, and it won the national. So it was like our campaign was voted the best one. And I must have been 19 when I did that. So again, that was straight on the CV. And I think that opened a lot of doors for me in my early kind of career. People go, well, you weren't just working at McDonald's, you did a corporate job for McDonald's when you were there. And that's kind of what got me I think that's what got me my foot in the door at Princess, was them seeing that video.
Even though your main role with McDonald's was making burgers and fries, right?
Yeah, I was just a regular crew member there at the time. I remember that's what they called us then. I don't know if that's still the terminology, but yeah, crew member is
Mm-hmm.
what we were called.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, Princess made you an offer, but then after you applied and were accepted, what happened?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay, shall we say. Um, Basically, when you're going to any port that has somewhere in the States as a home port or a turnaround port, you need to get a seaman's visa, which I think, if I remember rightly, was called a C1D visa. And of course, you think this is now 2007. And so security was massively tight at all the US embassies around the world, especially at the one in London. And, you weren't allowed to bring anything into the building other than your documents. So, if you're traveling up, well, what do you do with your keys? What do you do with your wallet? What do you do with your phone? You're not allowed to take anything in other than the actual documents. So my parents travelled up with me for the day, and they was going to go around London for a bit and then meet back up with me. Firstly, we had to get off our train because apparently someone was on the tracks, and we didn't know whether someone had fallen on the tracks, jumped on the tracks, or was just walked onto the tracks. But whatever the delay was, we couldn't carry on our journey on the train. So we had to get off and get up into the London as normal, and then tried to get a bus. No buses were stopping. We're thinking, well, this is a bit strange. And finally, we managed to get a cab, and on the cab, and London cabbies chat like no one's business. And we found out there was rumours of like a foiled terror plot in London that day. So there was police everywhere. Areas of London were being shut down, and we're trying to get to, of all places, the US embassy.
Uh-huh.
So of course, we're running about 20 minutes late at this point, and we finally get there, and we all jump out of the cab, and then I look round and I think, well, where's my documents? Because my mum had them all in a bag. She'd left her bag in the taxi, which is now driving off down the street right outside the US Embassy. So, of course, I immediately start running down the road, shouting, stop, outside the US Embassy on a day of a heightened terror alert in London. So, needless to say, I was stopped by security pretty quickly. And then, of course, what's the first thing they asked me? Can you show us some ID? I was like, well, I could if I could get to that cab because it's all in there. I think it took about an hour or so for them to literally talk to people and get it all cleared up. And I think once my parents called up and was like, well, look, they had their ID on them. I think my dad had his wallet, which had his ID and all that. So they could see it was, all this kind of stuff. But I didn't even get to go into the building at that point because I had nothing to confirm it. So then I had to call up the Manning office down in Southampton. And they obviously asked me, oh, yeah, how's it gone? And I was like, well, do you know what? It couldn't have gone any worse, to be honest. And there was a bit of a misunderstanding here because I said, well, how's this going to affect me joining the ship? And they said, well, you won't be joining that ship anymore and we'll let you know. And I was like, shh. I was like, oh, Christ, at this point, I thought I'd lost the job. But what they didn't tell me was I'd lost the spot on that particular berth where there was a spot open and I'd have to wait for the next available space. So I was supposed to be joining the Sea Princess in the Caribbean. And then, so I'd spent weeks, researching all the ports it was going to, looking at what all the excursions were going to be, really, really excited for it. And in fact, that day we got back home to Dover, the pub I was working at the time, that was supposed to be my last Friday there. And so, they'd organised this leavers party for me. And I was like, I'm not going anywhere at the minute, guys. So you walk into this party and you're like, yeah, I'm not actually going anywhere yet. And I didn't know whether I still had the job at the time. So it was about another 4 or 5 weeks of just thinking, well, that's it. I'm never going to hear back from these guys. How long do I wait until I contact them and chase them up? And then finally, I think it was about 6 weeks after that, because I'd had to go and I finally got the visa. I went up there. So I was in contact with the office again at this point. And they said, right, so you're going to the Coral Princess now. And it's going to be 2 months in Alaska and then 4 months on the Panama Canal run in the Caribbean. So
you lucked out. So beginning with your arrival in Alaska, talk about your start with Coral Princess.
Yeah, so we flew into Anchorage, and then we didn't realize it was an hour and a half bus ride to Whittier, which has become a legendary town for any cruise workers because there's a little phrase where they always sort of say there's nothing shittier than Whittier because there's just nothing there in the town. I think there's one bar. Well, there's probably a few more than that now, but when we were there was one bar that they would always take you to. And but again, I thought, I flew into Anchorage, so I thought, didn't realize that we were going to be on a bus for an hour and a half or however long it was to get there. I mean, that's a good few years ago now. But I remember I was you're just chatting to everyone, especially when you're brand new to it. There was another English guy there. He was wearing the same football shirt of the team that I support. Everton, which for your US listeners, they're the other team in Liverpool that never gets as much press, basically, because we've not been very good for a lot of years. But we were around third. Our club started in the late 1880s, and we are having a terrible season at the moment. But so I was just chatting to this guy, and I mentioned, I support the same team. And he showed me a match day program from the game, and he was in the program. They had like a section in the program, like fans abroad, and it was him somewhere. I think it might have been on the Great Wall of China or some exotic location, and he's wearing his Everton jersey. So, not knowing anything at all about how ships work at this point, I just kept chatting to the guy on the bus, and it was only once I got on board, I realised, shit, this guy's the cruise director, which is like one of the higher positions. He's in charge of all entertainment and scheduling and all that kind of stuff on board.
Mm-hmm.
And his name was Martin Moss, and I think I worked with him a couple of more times down the years. But yeah, it was funny. I think I remember saying to him, I first contract. Is this ship any good,
Mm-hmm.
or something along those lines? And he just started laughing because obviously it was his ship. With a lot of senior staff, they will do a rotation on the ship, so it'll be their ship for like a year or 2 years or something.
Mm-hmm. And I recall from when I spoke to you before, you had no clue what a cruise director is, right?
No, I didn't know what the job was. I didn't know what it entailed. And yeah, I mean, it was only when I, you get kind of, you see that everyone starts running up to him and all the staff, welcome back and all this kind of stuff. And you see that, wait, this guy knows everyone on board. It was kind of, as we got into like the port area and started going through security, and I had to wait around from someone from my department to come and fetch me, and he just walked straight on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, that's kind of the first idea when you get, okay, there's quite a hierarchy where everything breaks down on board.
Mm-hmm. So give us some highlights of that first contract.
Wow, I mean, cool. Where'd you start? I mean, I suppose the first thing was meeting the rest of the team. I think the guy was another English guy who come and met me, and we'd actually, then there was another English guy who was my senior at the time. Who, so you go there, and the first person you work with is also English, and he's your boss. And I think we were around the same age, so we hit it off quite well. But I think, if I remember rightly, he had been working for another cruise line, and then mid-contract managed to get the job with Princess and gone straight to Princess. So at this point, I think he was about 7 or 8 months into a contract. And as I would learn, 6 months is basically the standard for our department. And so he was just really, really burnt out at this point. And they then asked him if he could stay a bit longer. He wasn't getting along with the manager at the time and a few other people on the team. And so I kind of noticed straight away there was this kind of, on the Coral Princess in our department, half the team is upstairs on deck 9, sandwiched in a corridor behind a room service place in between passenger corridors. So you see the looks we get from passengers when you're stumbling into your cabin or stumbling out. And they're like, where are these? And we had to be very quiet as well on that ship because you were in between passenger areas. But then the more senior photographers on the team and the management people, they were down on deck 4 in the crew area. So there was already this kind of us against them thing I kind of felt when I got on board. And then within about, I'd say maybe 5-6 weeks of being there, my boss got himself into trouble a couple of times, and he ended up getting fired for being, let's say, hungover the next morning at a full emergency drill. And he'd got in trouble. Well, we'd had my birthday on board a few weeks after I started. He got me a birthday cake, and that had ended up all over the bar and all over each other. And there was just birthday cake wreckage all up the corridor. So someone else had grabbed it at one point off us and just thrown it everywhere. But because he'd got the cake, it was a photo department, and it was my birthday. My senior, I think he got a formal written warning, and 3 of those and you're fired. And I got a verbal warning, and I'd only been on board less than 2 weeks at this point. And I remember, I think it was the, I forget what the job's called now. I think it was a customer services director, or CSD, we called him. So I think it would be hotel general manager now. And he basically said, he gives me like the riot act. He's like, you're still on probation, right? We can send you home like that. And I'm just like, right, I need to really kind of keep my nose clean now. And, because you just kind of get caught up in the whole cruise lifestyle, and everyone was in a bar every night. That was what you did when you finished work. Everyone went to the bar. If you didn't really drink, then you didn't really socialize, unfortunately, back then. And I kind of just threw myself into all of it. So you kind of suddenly get used to having about 3 to 4 hours sleep a night, and working hours. Everyone on board at the time was scheduled to work 13 hours a day. Or sorry, on your contract states a minimum. Well, not minimum. Your contract states you will work 13 hours a day. And some days you do that. Some days you do less. Some days you do more. It just, being in a video department, there's only 2 of us. So your schedule would kind of be based on where the ship was going, what events you had to film on board. And so on a 7-day Alaska cruise, sometimes it would be similar. So you'd be like, okay, this week we got Country and Western Night to film on the second day of the cruise every week. And what my boss was good at the time, he'd rotate it. So if he filmed it one week, I'd film it the next week. And what was really good was that he would kind of take me under his wing. So, he'd come along to my events, make sure I knew what I was doing. And I was really impressed. He was really good. The problem was, I think he just got to the stage where he was burnt out and wanted to go home. And then I think they kept extending his contract and extending it. And I think, sadly, alcohol is kind of a thing that a lot of people turn to in those situations. And we always say you need to stay off the radar. Everyone drinks quite a lot on cruise ships, but you have to keep it under control, and not to the stage where your co-workers are noticing it's a problem, and definitely not the passengers notice it a problem. And unfortunately, my friend got on the radar, and he got fired. And so I'm suddenly like, right, I'm about 6 weeks in, and I remember the office says, well, can you get the DVD out without anyone else? I was like, well, I'm going to have to, aren't I? So he'd kind of shown me the final process of making a DVD, because at this point, I knew how to shoot, I knew how to edit, but I didn't know that process. And we'd been through it a couple of times. But as a senior, it was his job to make the actual DVD and get it out. So, you go from shooting it, editing it, burning the actual DVDs, and literally handing it out in a case to the guests at the end of the 7-day cruise. So you do the full process of production on it. And then they kept trying to get a replacement. And I think I ended up being by myself for about 3-4 weeks. So that is the biggest trial by fire I think I've ever had in any job. Suddenly you've gone from working in a pub to being on the phone to Los Angeles at like all hours of the day and emailing other ships, and you just have to do it because that's it's sink or swim. And in the middle of this, our main manager also got fired, and so it's like completely rudderless department at this point. And you're just thinking, oh god, this is gonna And I remember the bosses came on board when the ship was in Vancouver, because we'd go from Vancouver to Whittier back and back every week. And they come on board just to like, guys, look, this is the new manager's coming in really soon. Neil, you're going to get a new senior videographer really soon. You guys are doing great. Just keep going. Because it didn't affect the sales. What was good is, because the rest of the team saw me working my ass off to make sure I could do it all by myself, and I got them to help. My roommate at the time, Rad, she came down. He would help me burn DVDs. And, another friend, Amanda, and her roommate was another English girl. And again, my next roommate, another English guy, Liam. So there was lots of new people on board. And I think it's that trial by fire thing. You're all in it. You're all new. So you're all kind of just buckling down and getting on with it. And that's, I think, probably why a lot of us are still friends to this day. We at least still stay in contact with where each other is in the world at this point.
Now that trial by fire that you described, you had to do that. I don't want to overstate the case, but it was somewhat under the fog of alcohol, because you told me when you first started, it was like, you imagine what going away to college would be like. What was it like at the very beginning?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, because when I went to college, I went a couple of years later because I didn't know what I wanted to do. When I decided I wanted to do film and media and TV and all that, I wanted to be there. And so I lived at home. I went to a college nearby where I live, so I could live at home and still do my degree. And so I wasn't, so I'd come home every night. So I wasn't in that kind of college lifestyle. And then suddenly you're on a cruise ship where you've got 5 cabins next door to each other, 2 people a cabin. So it's like, and you just become, by proxy, friends with these people because you're working with them every day. You're seeing them every day. And yeah, you end up in the bar every day. It wasn't uncommon to be, I think the bar didn't even really get going until probably 11:30 midnight, because most people didn't finish work till 11 o'clock at night. So that's when the bar would pick up. Generally, on a lot of them, they'd open at 6 p.m. On a lot of ships, their bar would open for alcohol. So, a lot of the entertainment staff, boom, they're straight there at 6 o'clock to have a few drinks before they go out and do the doors in the evening for the show. And the same with the photographers. In between filming, taking pictures in the restaurants, it's straight down to the bar. I remember on that one, there was if you've ever been, I'm sure they still do it because it makes them too much money for them not to. But when you're in the restaurants, they have them all dressed up and they outside the restaurant in like pirate outfits or things like that on certain cruises. And pirates was one of the most insane things I've ever seen. The managers were literally encouraging you to get absolutely drunk off the face and then go out and shout at the passengers and pretend to be a pirate. And I was just, I remember my first roommate was this crazy Indian guy called Raj. I will never forget this one day when me, him, one of his old friends who would be my next roommate, Monet, South African guy. And we're playing football with a parrot outside while we're waiting before to be let in. So we're just kicking this parrot back and forth. Not a real parrot, a toy one, obviously. Stuffed toy parrot. And,
I would hope not a real one.
Just to clarify that. And Raj just boots it and it goes flying into the main dining room and it lands on someone's table in their food. And you just see everyone turn around. They're like, look at horror on the way his face is. And without missing a beat, Raj runs into the restaurant, does a barrel roll across the floor, pulls his sword out and stabs the parrot, picks it up off the table and goes, don't worry, folks, I've got it. And then turns around and walks out. And like some people were laughing and like clapping. And then, the lady on the table looked terrified. And the look we got, and I think we were banned from doing photos in a restaurant for about a month after that. And like the manager at the time was not very happy over that either. So, it was just, I think I just got used to it. I just got used to like the sort of 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night. I will say, I kind of, once my new senior come on board, she was from California. And we kind of got in a bit more of a routine then. We kind of, because Alaska was winding down, and I think she arrived just before we got to we did a full transit at the Panama Canal and did some different ports in Mexico on the way. And then we made our way to Florida, and we'd be doing an 11-day round trip from Florida, from Port Everglades. And we'd be going to, let me remember off the top of my head, I think I can. It was Aruba, Cartagena, Colombia, the Panama Canal. You'd then have Costa Rica, and you'd have you'd have Limon, Costa Rica, and then Ocho Rios in Jamaica before another day at sea, or 2 days at sea, I think, before getting back to Florida. And we do that for the next 4 months. So again, just getting used to the ship life in general kind of takes a month or so. And so, just as I was getting used to it, then the itinerary changes. So it's like starting something completely new. And
I remember you indicated when you guys repositioned to Florida, a big highlight for you was Publix, and I could relate to Publix because I lived in Florida for a few years. Say something about that.
Oh well, Florida, I suppose, was my first proper turnaround port because Alaska just seemed like it didn't. Florida just seemed like not regular, but for me, it was like it felt you kind of get in the craziness of ship life. And over the years, I loved a good turnaround day because as a video guy, I might have a bit of stock to bring in the mornings, but generally most of the photos, they store it for me. I'd come and get it once we sailed. But so turnaround day in Florida, I'd be able to get off the ship fairly early, and you could they'd run you a shuttle bus for the crew only to Publix or is it Galleria Mall? I think it was a Galleria Mall there. So there was that. And it was just like being back in regular life again briefly. You could go to this is how old this is. We'd have to go to an internet cafe to check your email and just see what's been going on in the real world, because bar keeping up with daily news and sports scores, there wasn't really anything else. You were kind of in this cruise bubble the whole time. You didn't really get a chance to find out what was going on elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. All these exotic. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, all these exotic places, and then my highlight for the thing would be going to Publix and finding they've got an English or was it a British section, and they had Robinson's orange squash there. Because try and explain orange squash on board, it's kind of like an orange cordial that you dilute with water. So it's like, I don't know, maybe you want like a fifth of orange cordial, and then you fill it up with water, and that's what I used to drink religiously. And of course, can't get that on board. So I think the best we could do at the time was Gatorade. And then just finding food places. That's when we discovered Five Guys. They've only literally just came to the UK in probably the last sort of 5 or 6 years. And there was one right in this, and it was cheap. It was really good. We were going to Five Guys. There was Firehouse Subs as well nearby that we go to. There was an Irish pub, and there was a Thai restaurant. And there was a Polish electronics shops called Port Electronics, where you could go and buy all your latest sort of technology stuff, and it'd be dirt cheap and be crew prices. So, we all went. I remember going in and buying a set of Bose speakers, which immediately made me popular because we'd have them out in the corridor playing music all night. Hi and welcome to the We Need the Roads podcast. I'm Neil.
And I'm David, and we're here usually every 2 weeks to review all the latest TV and movies.
We'll have trailer breakdowns, rampant speculation, arguments, and the occasional spoiler special. And you might be asking, why are you called We Need the Roads? Well, that's simply because all the other best Back to the Future references were already taken for other podcasts.
Follow us for regular updates on Twitter at Needed Roads, and subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice.
We Need Roads is not a podcast about roads or roads and film in general.
Great Scott!
We needed roads.
Well, but besides those highlights of Florida, like Publix and the Polish electronics shop, another highlight, I'm sure, was your weekly trip to Panama Canal. And you had some good stories in the Joy of Cruising again about your time at the Panama Canal. Talk about a little bit of that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for most people on this cruise, the Panama Canal is the big one. That's why they're doing the trip. And it's funny to me, like, I didn't know a thing about the Panama Canal, and I was on that run. I was there to, like, do that cruise, and I didn't know anything about it. Literally, all I knew, I didn't know the history of it. I didn't know the size or the scale of any of that stuff. It was probably the longest day of the cruise as well. The first time we did it, we did a full transition. It took the whole day. But then on a regular cruise, you would just go in maybe two of the locks, I think. I think it was the Miraflores and the Gatton locks, if I remember rightly. But what made this probably one of the most interesting days of the cruise from a filming point of view was you would have to get off the ship about 4:30 in the morning, climb down a rope ladder, jump onto the moving pilot boat, and then that boat would take you to the actual canal, and you would be sat there. Sorry, and you'd be there, set up, and you would be dockside, and you'd be filming the ship as it came through the Panama Canal. And then the craziest thing, I mean, most people, it's a life thing to go. It's a life goal to do the Panama Canal. I got to walk across the Panama Canal, and you've got these tiny little gates on the locks, and we would walk across it and stand there and film the ship coming right towards us on it. It was just crazy. And you're looking down. I mean, there's so many things that I wouldn't do in a million years now in terms of safety, being a bit older. But at the time, when you're in like your mid-20s, you don't think anything of it. You've got this little life jacket on. I'm thinking the fall would have probably killed me. The life jacket's not going to do anything. And I remember my friend, Amanda, she's walking past. She's got one camera and a backpack. I've got a massive backpack. I've got a tripod slung over one shoulder. And over the other shoulder, I've got a giant shoulder-mounted camera, because this was the days before smaller tapes. This was the day before mini DV tapes and even memory cards. So we had big old digibeta tapes. And this is actually I only had 2 contracts, so we had these big cameras. I suppose one other big thing with the Panama Canal was that they let us do a helicopter shoot once or twice. Now, my boss did it the first time, the senior videographer at the time. And so then the idea was to be expected that I'd get to do it the next time. But the shoot didn't go very well from what I gather. And I looked at the footage, and our photo manager, so my boss's boss, because when you're a junior videographer, you have 2 bosses. You've got the senior videographer, and then you've got the photo manager. So you've got kind of 2 people you kind of have to go through. And the photo manager at the time, her idea, she wanted the footage of the Panama Canal helicopter shoot to be a separate video. And then my boss comes back, and she had maybe, 15 minutes of footage, and it was shaky as anything, and just, it wasn't really usable. And I was like, and because the footage was so bad, we weren't allowed to do a helicopter shoot for about another 2-3 months of the season. And it was only when I was getting towards the end of my contract that I kept pushing the manager for it. I said, well, look, they had a chance. They blew it. Let me have a crack at it. And they said, well, what would you do different? And I said, well, I'd find out how to make sure it's not as shaky as what we got before. And, well, how are you going to do that? I'm going to email some of the guys on the other ships who have done it before. Ask them. And I think I emailed this Canadian guy, Travis, who I'd end up going to work with on a later contract. And I remember him emailing me back saying, look, there's not really much you can do in these helicopter shoots. But the bonus is there's no doors on the helicopter. And I'm thinking, what? There's no doors? And he says, so what I would do, he said, wrap the camera in a pillow. That'll cut down on some of the vibration from the helicopter. Put it on the floor of the helicopter, zoom out as wide as you can go, and just hit record. He says, because the helicopter's going to do the work. You don't need to worry about moving the camera or trying to zoom in on stuff, because you can't. Just leave it recording, and the helicopter will do the work. And I remember that, and that kind of, when we was in Alaska, to get back to that briefly, that's how we used to shoot the glaciers. You set the camera up, and when the ship's turning around, you speed up the footage a little bit, but you get these lovely smooth shots. And everyone will go, oh, well, did you do that from a helicopter, or did you shoot that from a plane? This is, before drones were a thing. And no, you just literally would set the camera up, leave it, walk away for 10 minutes, come back, and you get this really nice kind of tracking shot. And so that kind of advice I kind of took from there as well. But I kept arguing about it. And then finally, I think it was my second to last cruise, or last cruise. No, it must have been my second to last cruise. And they said, yep, the helicopter shoots back on. So there's always a senior photographer to take pictures. and there was the Canadian assistant manager, Christian, and me got to do it. And so, you do your standard Panama day, get set up. You get up at about 4:30 in the morning, climb down the rope ladder, jump onto the pilot boat. And then this time, instead of getting taken to the canal, we get taken to an airfield, which looked like just a dingy warehouse in the middle of nowhere. And again, I tried not to drink as much the night before a Panama shoot. That it kind of become like an unofficial quiet night for our department, because it's such a long day for everyone shooting the canal. So that once kind of the team started settling down and the new management were on board, that kind of become like an unofficial thing, right? It's quiet night. You can't have everyone keeping everyone up to all hours when they got to start at 4:30 or 5 in the morning. And so I get in a helicopter and I'm still half asleep, to be honest. I'm not really with it. And it's only then it dawns. I look at a helicopter and it's this little twin blade thing. And I thought it was like a mini toy one they put out front of the helicopter place to like advertise it. Oh, you can do helicopter filters. I didn't realize that was our actual helicopter. The next issue we encountered was pilot doesn't speak a word of English because, obviously we're in Panama. So you've got a guy from England, a guy from Canada, and a guy from Panama, and none of us can communicate with the pilot. At least he knew what the job was. It was just to fly around the ship in circles. But yeah, the one thing Travis said, I thought he was joking, but no, there are no doors on this helicopter. So I had one little seatbelt around my waist, and that was it. And I'm just thinking, what? And I just couldn't even. I'd never been in a helicopter before in my life, and now I'm in one in a foreign country. The pilot doesn't speak a word of English, and there's no doors. So, and I think I had my eyes closed for maybe the first sort of 10 minutes of it. I just literally had the camera on the floor, pointed out the window. Pointed out the empty gap where the door should be, hit record, and just like Travis advised me, just keep the shot wide. And then once it kind of settled down, I was like, okay, I'm not, I kind of calmed down a little bit. Then I opened my eyes and kind of got into it. But as well, there's not really a lot you can do. It is like he told me, just keep the camera wide, just make sure it's recording. Obviously, make sure you're in focus, and the ship and the helicopter will do the work as it kind of circles the ship. And then what he did, what I thought was just as amazing, because the thing is, as you're doing a circle of the ship, from a technical point of view, all you can really do is cut between the 4 different angles at different points, because you can't cut from this angle to that angle. He then took us in over Panama City, so suddenly we're flying in between all these skyscrapers, and that was amazing. And that was enough to bung on an extra DVD and charge a little bit extra for. So the manager was happy, and the stuff came out quite well. It was an experience. And then the one other thing I mentioned about Panama is one day when we were doing the lot. So I'm running, and I noticed to look up, and all the passengers are taking pictures and video of me running alongside the ship. And someone must have had it on a cell phone. You have the morning show. So if you're on a cruise, you have the morning cruise director's announcements. And they always vary. Certain ships, it's literally just the guy in the office reading off a bit of paper what you can do today. And then this one, who was the cruise director? It was Ron Goodman. And I worked with Ron a couple of times, and he's brilliant guy. And he had a clip of this that someone had sent him, or like one of the passengers had brought to him. And so whenever I appeared on the morning show to promote the video, they played this clip of me running along the side of the ship. So it was great, though, because, it's something memorable that the passengers remember you from. So as an advertising tool, it was superb, because they would look at that clip and go, oh, yeah, that's Neil. He's a video guy. Yeah, we saw you running alongside the ship yesterday. And I was like, I've only done it once. And they just play that video every cruise. But also, the thing we did love about this is back when I suppose the company spent a bit of money on the photography department, not to get too inside baseball on that one. But when if you weren't doing the helicopter shoot, once you film the ship going through the locks, you've got hours to kill before you can film the ship going through the other locks. And so the company paid for to take us to, I think, I can't remember the name of the hotel. It's in my blog. I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
Hotel Melia.
Hotel Melia, that was it, yeah. And it was beautiful. And there was all your food and drink was paid for. There was a pool. I remember going ziplining there. Me and my friend Amanda, we were on that one once. And we went ziplining. Never ziplined before in our lives, I don't think. And this is just in between between working. So you're having a drink at the pool, and there was crocodiles in the water near the hotel. And I'd never ziplined before. And I kind of went a bit wrong when I was doing it. And so I got stuck halfway over it. And she's like taking video of me from the other end as I'm coming in. It's like, Neil, look down, there's crocodiles. I was like, yeah, sure there is. Don't look down. And then the guy had to come out and rescue me. So he kind of literally shimmies backwards down on the zip line, kind of clips onto me underneath, and then drags me to the end of it. And then it's only when I look back at her footage, I look back and I'm like, you can see an actual head raising out of the water beneath where I was. So I was just like, but it's insane. But it was such a long day, though, because you wouldn't get back on board the ship. You'd start at 4:30, 5 in the morning, and you wouldn't get back on board till about 5, 6 p.m.
And all that time, you are luxuriating at Hotel Melia. Open bar and food. And now, didn't you, one day, you guys went into the city, right?
Yeah, we weren't actually supposed to go into Panama City, but my roommate at the time, I had both, because with my roommate, Raj, a lovely guy, but he snored like a drill, drank like a sailor, and he played poker all the time. So there would be half the crew bar in our cabin till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And it's kind of like a rite of passage. I found out later on that if you can survive a month with Raj as your roommate, you've made it. You're part of the team. And so I survived my month with Raj. I moved in with a South African guy called Monet, who was the new assistant manager, and got on like a house on fire with him. And me and Monet, but Raj had been roommates with Monet in their previous years. So they were really good friends from a couple of years beforehand. So the managers were like, I don't know if it's a good idea putting the three of you on this today. So it was the three of us doing the shoot. First of all, we didn't come back and film it the second time, which you're supposed to, because they said, look, have you got enough footage? I said, well, yeah, I can, I got enough. And he goes, right, well, we've got enough pictures. We're not going back. Let's go into the city. And so we paid the driver a little bit extra, and he took us to Panama City. And that was such an eye-opener, man, because a lot of times as a tourist, especially on a cruise ship, you only see the sanitized near the ship kind of parts of what you're supposed to see. This guy took us right into the city center, and, Monet and Rad, they jump out and we go down a side alley, and you're taking pictures of all these like local kids who are playing football, and it was just, you really saw the city properly. But I mean, you saw how friendly the people were, but you also saw the seedier side of it, and how definitely not going to go down that alley where there's some guy walking around with no trousers on. You're looking at all this stuff. I mean, I remember once we were, it was the same time actually, and we went in for somewhere for a meal, and we were lucky that one of the guys with us, Liam, he was another guy from London, first contractor like me, but he could speak fluent Spanish. And so we go in this place, our driver's with us, it's all fine. And then Liam says something to the waitress. And I don't know what he said, but the atmosphere literally just turned on a dime. And we're just like, are we going to get in like a bar fight here or something? And our driver comes in, and he was like dressed all in white. And he looked like, some old school kind of Panamanian pimp. And he just walks in and he's like, guys, we need to leave. I was like, Liam, what the hell did you say, man? We never knew. Because he'd been having quite a few drinks that day, so he wasn't with it at best at that point. And I just remember having to run out to the people carrier we got and just shoot off. And yeah, I mean, those Panama days, they were long and crazy, man. But just, yeah, you get to see another side of. That's when I truly felt like, okay, I'm really seeing the real place for the first time, when we were like that in Panama.
Now, to remind the listeners, all of these activities that you're talking about all happened in your first contract. So talk about approaching the end of that first contract and returning to UK with initially no plans to return the Princess.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, I didn't really get on with my new senior when she came on board. We kind of clashed heads a lot. She was, she'd probably not had that long off between contracts, and she just wanted to come in, do the basics, and, enjoy ship life. And, there I am, new to the company, new to ship life, and just wanting to do the best I can at the job. So I can imagine from her point of view, I was really annoying as hell quite a lot of the time. But for me, I was looking at it going, well, I'm not really learning that much more than I know already, and my stuff's better than yours. She used to no-show some of the onboard ship events, and that created a bit of a rift between her and the entertainment staff. And of course, I'd met the cruise director when I come on. I was good friends with a lot of the entertainment staff. And so I kind of went the other way. And it's like, well, look, these events, some of them aren't great. You might have 10 people turn up to a country and western night, but you still have to film it. How do you make it interesting? So we'd start shooting, western shootouts. We start doing skits and getting the staff involved. And if you made the event look fun to people walking past, going, what are these guys doing there? For 50th night, we'd have someone walking around with a fake Elvis hat on and guitar. And they'd see us doing these little promos, And the passengers, well, what's that? And then we'd help him. And it worked for us because I would even dress up to like the entertainment staff on the nights, on the theme nights. Well, it's basically to get out of wearing regular uniform, to be fair. Wearing jeans and a country and western shirt is a hell of a lot more comfortable than wearing trousers and a polo shirt or a suit in the evening to film. And I managed to convince the manager. So, well, look, it makes me look much more part of the event. By that, it's going to help sales because crew staff are going to promote it more, which they did. And so the problem was I was doing a lot more work than I really should have been. The schedule at this point, to me, wasn't really fair because the problem was because I was doing such a good job on the events, the entertainment staff wanted me to do all the events. And, any schedule really should be 50-50. And so I kind of got in a stage where I was getting so burnt out and so tired by the end. And I think I had a big blow up with my boss one day and I just kind of more or less told her where to go. And we eventually, I think the last kind of 6-7 weeks of the contract was pretty much one of us would in the video room, the other one would leave. Still do our jobs, but we didn't socialize. We just clashed really. And I remember you get to your last week, and I think I got to my last week, and I was like, right, this is party week. I'm done. I'm not fussed about coming back. I don't really, I'm over it. I'm just going to make the most of going out this week. And I think every excursion we booked, I got a friend on. Because I was good friends with the excursions department by this point. So I'd get a friend out with me or a couple of friends sometimes, and we just go out and drink every day. But I was still doing the job, though. That's the thing. I was still getting the job done. And then it's funny, you get to that last week, and it's almost like prison. You're kind of sitting there going, I cannot wait to be done. I'm counting the days. I'm counting the hours. It's like an inmate waiting to get out. And that's kind of how a lot of us feel when you get to the end of a contract.
Mm-hmm. Well... you went back to the UK, and you thought you were done, and the rest is history because you spent the next 7 years on various princess ships. So obviously something changed your mind, and you came back. What was the deciding factor to come back for that second contract?
Well, when I got back after sleeping for about 2 weeks, it was then just kind of getting used to regular life. Just going to the shops. Catching up with friends, being able to go out at night. It's a bizarre thing because almost every cruise ship you are back on board for the evening, right? So you've imagined 6 months of never being outside at night. It's insane when you think about it. So not being able to go to a pub other than the one bar that you have on the ship, and I basically did nothing but kind of relax and chill out, and catch up on sports and movies and all that kind of stuff, and see friends for 2 months, and then I suppose I was still doing that. I hadn't even thought about going back. And friends were like, oh, we're going here next. I'm off to this ship next. Where are you going next? I was like, oh, I've not really made up my mind. I haven't heard back from Southampton since I ended the contract. So I'm not too fussed. And then I got an email from my friend Amanda, who she was first contractor, same as me, on the Coral. And she was midway through her contract on the Sun Princess, which was out in Australia and I think New Zealand. And then it was going to go off and do Asia. And I didn't know any of this at the time. I had no interest in seeing what ships were where. And I remember I remember seeing some of her pictures on Facebook, I think it was. I was like, oh, yeah, that looks like a fun ship. And then she dropped me an email. I was like, do you know where you're headed next? I was like, no, I'm not really fussed. She goes, you idiot, you're down for here. You're scheduled to come here in like a month's time. I was like, well, no one's told me that. I said, oh, is it? Well, I'm a bit burnt out. I don't really. And she goes, are you crazy? This ship's brilliant. And she sold it to me so well. And like the managers are really cool. The manager was another English guy called Mick from England, who loved his heavy metal and basically didn't care what the offers for. He was but he was one of the most successful managers going at the time. The assistant manager was this lady from New Zealand, Kirsty, who I went on to work with a couple of times. She was lovely, one of the nicest people you could meet. And the senior videographer at the time was a Canadian guy called Travis. And again, he's the guy I think I'd emailed when I was having issues on the Coral, and he'd helped me out over email. And she's like, you'd be an absolute idiot to turn this down. I said, well, why? Where's it cruising? She goes, it's doing a bit of Australia and Asia, and then it's doing a world cruise. And literally I said, what's a world cruise? And I didn't know. And it ended up being, we'll probably get onto this when we talk another time. But part of that contract was a 3-month, 75-day Trans-Pacific World Cruise.
Wow.
And a different port every day for half your contract. People, and I realized that I think I found out later that my manager, she had put in a good word for me because they needed a really strong junior videographer for the world cruise. And where I kind of wasn't going to get a promotion to a senior spot straight away, they wanted that. This was like the best I could get. Aside from that, so yeah, I was just like, okay, do you know what? Yeah, I'm in. I'm going to do it. And I'm sure we'll talk about the Sun Princess some other time.
Yeah, I'll definitely have you back because in the book, I really only wrote about your first contract, but I read your diary through many more contracts, and it's hilarious. And so we'll cover the highlights of the rest of your tenure at Princess Cruises in a subsequent podcast. So let's look at the present. So you're a video editor and you run a podcast, which I enjoy very much, called We Needed Roads. Tell our listeners what the podcast is about and who out there it would particularly appeal to.
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of my real sort of joy at the minute is doing a podcast. I mean, I did TV and film at university. I actually did 5 years of college. I did a 2-year kind of, I suppose you guys would call it, community college course to get in. And then I did my 3-year degree. And that was 5 years of just film stuff back to back. And then, like you say, within a few years on Princess. But working on ships, you don't really get the chance to watch much at all because you're just working all the time or editing all the time. And I suppose when COVID hit, me and a former colleague, we'd always chat about when we worked together, me and my former colleague, David, who used to work for the company I work for now. Yeah, we just basically started it for fun. And it's kind of snowballed from there. You know, I bet you find yourself, you haven't just started this one recently, all your friends and family listen to the first couple of episodes. And then there'll be this kind of drop off where you kind of find your real audience. And these are the people you really want the podcast to get out to. And it was just us talking about what we do. And we've been doing it for 2 years now. We've just recorded our 60th episode. And we're at the stage now where we're actually kind of getting guests in now from the industry. I have an big interview I'm literally writing up in the minute. And I'm going to be interviewing someone who works on quite a few big shows very soon. And that's going to be like our big thing. At the minute, our 59th episode that just went out recently as we record this, we've had 3 times as many downloads as we've had for any podcast we've ever had before. And it's all because of this new Netflix show called Lockwood & Co. And the fans behind that have just been resharing our podcast everywhere. It's insane to just see the numbers keep shooting up. And that's the weird thing. You never know what people have an interest in or what's going to get their interest. So we just talk about everything. Generally, the pod is about TV news and movie news. We'll do reviews. I get out to the cinema pretty much every week. I mean, this week, for example, I am going literally within about an hour of us finishing here. And my local cinema chain has something called a secret screening. So you're going to go in, sit down, and you do not know the film you're going to be watching until it starts. And I think I am seeing 4 films in the next 6 days in the cinema. So safe to say, I go to the cinema a hell of a lot. That's right. It'll appeal to anyone who, there's so much TV and movies out there in a minute, and we watch almost all of it. So, and we've got different areas that we like. And so what works well is the idea of the podcast is essentially we hopefully tell you what to watch and then maybe what to avoid is kind of our main thing. You know, we do our top 10 lists, which are generally much more personal. We'll do deep dives, we'll do spoiler specials. And yeah, it's just fun to hopefully whittle down the choices of stuff. You know, if you go, oh, well, there's 5 new shows out this week, which one should we watch? Well, we can tell you. So that's kind of what we like to do.
So how can we follow you or We Needed Roads on social media and the internet?
So our podcast, first of all, we're up on all the big podcast platforms of choice. You literally just search We Needed Roads on Google. We're on Apple, Google, Spotify, about 20 other podcast directories. And for our socials, you can follow us at Needed Roads on Twitter, which I run, and I'm very active on there. I'm on there pretty much every day. And then we got the We Needed Roads on Instagram, which is run by David, which we're lucky if he updates once a month. So basically follow us on both and then be surprised when David posts something.
Okay. Neil, let's talk a little bit about the future. Have you cruised or traveled since leaving Princess? And do you have anything booked?
You know, it's funny. I think you get so many people who work on cruises are like, you know, they can have the travel bug for life. And I have loads of ex-colleagues who've gone on to work in airlines. And I have barely traveled at all since I finished. I kind of developed a real fear of flying on one of my last contracts. And I was just like, "Do you know what? If I don't have to get on a plane, I'm not getting on a plane." And also, I rarely ever cruise. I think I did one contract out of all my years in Europe. I was like, okay, you know what? You can get around Europe by train or by boat. So I was always sort of kind of planning to get around Europe. But yeah, I haven't really traveled much at all in a decade. Part of the issue for me is, by obviously having a fear of flying now, is I've been on so many excursions at so many places that I kind of know that experience you're getting from tours on excursions or tourist destinations. You know, if you've never been somewhere before, even if I've not been there, I know exactly how it works because I've done so many of them. So it kind of turns you off that side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, I'd rather see the place, go by myself, or have friends somewhere. That's the best way I always find to see somewhere, is visit with friends who are local and you get to see the real place. I kind of find doing the main kind of tourist thing now is kind of, having said that, I wouldn't mind doing the one cruise I never got to do that I'd like to do as a passenger would be a Northern Lights cruise.
Mm-hmm. And anything else on your travel bucket list? I mean, you've seen so much. You Great Wall of China, obviously Panama Canal. Do you have a bucket list?
As we've kind of established, I'm really into my sort of movies and TV, and music is another big one. And having worked that many years on ships, I missed out on all that kind of stuff working on board. So I tend to now spend most of the year, like my getaways now. I'll do lots of city breaks across the UK. You know, we got a family in Liverpool, so we'll have 3-4 days in Liverpool here and there. I go to a lot of music festivals as well. One of my friends that I used to be in a band with when I was a kid, he is now a band manager, and he's really on the right. He actually does the theme music for our podcast. I jokingly said to him once, right, we're all big Back to the Future fans. The podcast name is a pun on Back to the Future, where Doc Brown says, where we're going, we don't need roads. And I said, can you guys write, him and a friend who, obviously musicians couldn't do anything during COVID. I said, can you guys write me a theme song for the pod that sounds a little bit like The Power of Love by Huey Lewis, but not enough that we get sued? And they've recorded it for us, and it sounds exactly like you'd imagine. It sounds a lot like Back to the Future's The Power of Love. And my friend Ben, we got some festivals coming up this year that he's got bands on that we're going to. At this time next week, as we record this, I'm going to be visiting friends in Nottingham and going to see a couple of bands at the weekend. So that's kind of more my style now. I think I've got the travel bug out of my system to a point. However, the one thing I still really want to do, but I need to save up quite a bit for this, is I want to do a nice 2-month long European rail journey. It was one of my favourite films of all time. It's a film called Before Sunrise, and it's an Ethan Hawke and Judy Delpy one from, I want to say, 1994. And it actually came number one. We did our top 10 romantic movies of all time podcast. And of course, my co-host went with all the obvious ones. He had a bunch of Richard Curtis ones on there, a bunch of Disney stuff. And I went a bit more indie with my kind of sensibilities. And I went with Before Sunrise. And that's literally the story of an American tourist and a French girl who meet on a train across Europe. And then they just spend the day together in Vienna. They have the day and night because he has a connecting train the next day. And as the day goes on, they kind of realize they're really clicking. And it's just a film that stuck with me for years. And I always thought, do you know what? One day I'm going to do it. I'm just going to get on the train and just kind of travel through Europe. And part of me even wants to do the Austria one just to kind of visit the locations from the film. So that's definitely planned for the future once work kind of settles down enough that I can have the time off to actually go and do that.
Neil, before we let you go, a few fun cruise questions. So I recall you took advantage of the opportunity to occasionally patronize the specialty restaurants on board. What's your favorite cruise drink or cruise food or both?
For drink, for me, it's got to be the Long Island iced tea because I rarely paid for them because I used to film the drinks demos and I'd always give a free DVD to the guys who filmed it and they could send that home to their families. And so I'd always offer to pay, which was like the rule. And then they just never charged me for them. And so also there is the Beverly Hills iced tea. And I have a story about that, which I'll tell you about on another contract, which didn't end well for someone who had one of those.
What's in that?
I cannot tell you off the top of my head. I know it's got everything Long Island's got in it, but it's got about 2 more shots of booze as well. And it did not work out well for my friend who had one of them. Food-wise, for me, though, I'd say it's probably got to be the Crown Grill. Although I did love the ambience of Sabatini's, the Italian restaurant as well. I mean, off the top of my head, I can still remember what I'd have at the Crown Grill because it was such a massive restaurant experience. You'd have the French onion soup, you'd have the goat's cheese salad, filet mignon, and then there'd always be some kind of chocolate dessert. However, Sabatini's back in the day, you would have 7 courses, and you basically need about 3 hours for it. You pick a main, and they would just bring the rest out. I just like the ambience of it. You'd have, the Italian maitre d' on the door, showing you to the table, walking around, talking to the guests. And there was opportunity for us to put on a suit for the night and for the ladies to put on a dress. And so it was always a real highlight whenever we got to do that.
Talk about what was the food and drink choices like for crew?
You have it's like you watch Titanic, right? And they have the class system. That's still there now on ships. There's literally 3 classes on board the ship, as I like to call it. Your food and generally your experience on board, I think, varies massively depending on your rank. Like you just mentioned, officers, right? So officers, and I'll throw in with them heads of department. Well, all heads of department are officers. Doesn't matter. I think when people think officers, they think bridge, deck, and tech crew. But if you're a head of department, you're an officer on board. So like the photography manager, my direct boss, is classed as an officer on board, and they get their own cabin. So any officer generally gets their own cabin. And also guest entertainers. So like musicians who come on for just a cruise, and magicians, all the kind of guest ents, as we call them, they get their own cabins. And they get exactly the same cabins as you guys get. They get the really nice cabins with all the mod cons. And they exactly the same food as the passengers. They get room service. They get cabin stewards. So, if you're an officer on board, it's quite a nice life. I was in the next rank. I was down in the middle as staff. And as a staff member, you can pretty much go anywhere and do what you want at certain times and use the ship's facilities as long as they are quiet and not in peak passenger times. So there's a lot of shades of grey in what you can and can't do. And again, that would vary ship to ship. So the bonus for us, though, was meant we can eat in the passenger buffet. But I think for breakfast, and again, it varies ship to ship, it would be about 10:30 and breakfast would stop at 11. So if you're ever having breakfast late, around the last half an hour, you'll just see a big influx of crew coming to go and quickly get really nice breakfast before it all comes off. Same in the afternoon. For lunch, I think it used to be about 2:00 in the afternoon we could come up for lunch. In the evenings, I think it was after 8:00. Yeah, so being staff, like I said, we could eat anywhere pretty much on board except the main dining rooms. So, like I say, if we had a night off and there was space, we could go to the specialty restaurants. So usually once a cruise on a couple of ships, when I was on the Emerald Princess, we made it a thing every every turnaround day, the first night of the cruise, whoever was off on our photo department, if we'd hit our sales target the last cruise, whoever was off, be it 8 to 10 of us, we'd all go to the steakhouse. And then after staff, which we were, you had crew. And now crew have next to no deck privileges, which meant you could only eat in the crew mess at the certain times of day. And I think for a lot of Western crew, because for many of the Western staff, which I was, most of the crew are Indian, Filipino at the time. We get quite a few more South Americans and Eastern Europeans working on my last few contracts. But a lot of the time, the food down there was pretty terrible, if I'm honest. I don't think I was on one ship where food in the crew mess you would actively be excited about going to. And a lot of it was cooked by the Filipino guys themselves. So a lot of the food, I suppose for them, it was good for them because they cooked a lot of it. There'd be and sometimes you'd have the occasional stuff that was good. I remember there being some really nice Filipino adobo pork once or twice, but it would just be lots of rice and fish and chicken and those kind of dishes. One other thing I will mention about the food is on some of the other ships, this isn't necessarily to the Coral, all the outdoor food in eateries, we could go to those as well. So there was many times if I was filming something in the afternoon on the deck, I'd definitely go and grab a slice of pizza or something beforehand. Drinks. I will mention drinks. Last thing on food, I would say the quality of the food, even within the same company, varies massively from ship to ship. And I think it usually just comes down to who the main chefs were. I remember certain ships where people be like, oh no, this guy's leaving. I said, well, what's the big deal? The food's going to be absolutely crap once this guy leaves. He's one of the best chefs we have. He'll do the same for crew that he does for the passengers. And you notice that. You go on some ships, and I suppose you even notice that as a passenger, that the food varies massively from ship to ship. And there isn't that kind of consistency, even though so many of the cruise lines are under the same umbrella now. I will say on one of my highlights on food was the Royal Princess. I was on there when it first came out back in, I think, 2011, 2012, when it was brand new. I was on the setup team for it. And the food was amazing. It's the first ship I've been on where there was a taco station, an omelette station, and a cake shop in the middle of the buffet area. In fact, passengers complained that the buffet was so big that some of their food would be cold by the time they got to the table. I literally remember seeing that complaint on a comment card once. We'll definitely talk about passenger comment cards on another one because I've got some hilarious ones on there. Drinks. I'll just say we had water and orange juice were always free on board, but soft drinks and alcohol we did have to pay for, but it was massively discounted for crew. In fact, when I started, I think a bottle of beer was $1.50 on board, and a spirit in a mixer was probably, I think, around $1.80. And you could also bulk buy alcohol and soft drinks from one of the warehouse decks once a cruise. And yet, here's a funny rule. What you bought there, you are only supposed to drink in your cabin because they didn't want you taking it to the bar and cutting into the sails in the crew bar. And you couldn't obviously drink in passenger areas. So it was almost encouraging drinking in your cabin, which is definitely not what you should be doing. You shouldn't be sitting alone in your cabin and drinking or piling a bunch of people into a cabin because it's going to turn into a cabin party and you're going to get noise complaints. So, but they still did it all the time. I mean, I have met, there was one more story from the Coral. I worked with an Australian guy on the first contract who regularly, his bar bill was more than his wages every month. Not surprising, he did get let go at the end of that contract because he was just on it all the time. And that's what you get. I think on a cruise, you kind of get people there. I always think you get two kinds of people. You get people, or three kinds of people, sorry. I think you get three kinds of people on a cruise ship. You get, as for crew, you get people who are there to travel and see the world, people who are there to just make money, and that's all they do. They don't go out. They're just there to make money and treat it as that kind of job. And then you get people who are you generally younger, and they're just there to party. And that seems to be the three kind of crew you kind of get.
Well, based on the Cruise Ship Diaries, I think I know which one you fit into when you first started.
Definitely when I first started.
Well, lastly, give us, and I know you have a ton of them because I've read your diaries, but just pick out one. What's the funniest story you recall as cruise ship staff / crew?
But I suppose probably one of the funniest ones, looking back on it now, and again, this was one where it wasn't funny at the time, but this is, again, ties into the Coral. It's the first time I ever did a proper hike. Now, I'm not a hiking person. Where I live down south in Kent, there's opportunities for hikes, but you know, we haven't got mountains. You know, we're not that kind of place. And I think that was maybe my first day off on the Coral. So I'd been there maybe 3 days, worked the first 2 days, and this was my first day off in port. And I think it was the first turnaround day in Whittier. And my friend Amanda and her roommate Adina, they just come up and said, "Oh, we're going to go on a hike tomorrow. Do you want to come?" I was like, "Oh yeah, that'd be great." Stick the camera in the bag, you know, had the backpack on, had the little camera with me. Thought I'd go out and shoot some stuff because that's what we all think we're going to do when we start in the photography department in our time off. We all think we're going to be out every day taking as much pictures and video of our own in our free time. And then generally you want to spend most of it sleeping after a while. But I was like, okay, let's do this hike. I know nothing about hiking. So I had steel toe cap boots with me, not proper hiking boots. So the weight of these things. And this was Alaska in the end of August. So what the hell do you wear? Because it's very cold in certain places, and then you're also sweating buckets. And this was in Whittier, and I think it was the Prince William Sound Glacier. And the idea was we were going to hike there. So bear in mind, it's just me and two girls. No one's got a mobile phone. No one's got any kind of way to say, oh, if anything happened in an emergency. And you hike up this kind of mountain path, mountain / hill. I'm not quite sure what it would qualify as. And you get up to the top of this kind of big forest. You walk through the forest for about maybe another hour. And we got the instructions. And what the girls wanted to do is they wanted to get to the glacier and touch it. And there was a black sand beach down there that you could get to. And so we're walking up. We get to like the first thing. And one of our fellow photographers, Sheldon, the South African photog, he'd given us the directions. But again, this is in the day before smartphones we should have had at least a map, right? We just got a few directions written on a bit of paper here. And he's like, yeah, turn left at the lake. I remember filming this, and I'll post the video, actually, because I've got this little video I made from this day. And we just got completely lost, like in the middle of the forest on this hike. We eventually got down to the black sand beach, and we could see the glacier in the distance. And you work your way through the forest. You then come down this all this rock path, and there's waterfalls and all that coming through that you work your way through. You get down to the beach, and I'll never forget Amanda, being English but being from the north, I'm from the south, decides she wants to dip her feet in the water because obviously we're all like sweating because we've been hiking for hours and hours. Well, this is glacial water, so it's absolutely freezing. She hasn't got a towel with her, so now she's got wet feet, and we've got to work our way the whole way back. And as we got to the beach, we still hadn't got to where the glacier is. We still got, and you can see it, and you're like, but trying to judge the distance to it is also insane because, you know, it could be miles away and it looks like it's just there because of the sheer size of it. And as we get to the beach, we see Sheldon, the guy who told us the directions, on his way back. And he's like, well, guys, you've only got this long to get there. You know, you want to get back before the ship, you know, but before crew all aboard time. And of course, he goes, oh, yeah, it's fine. And I'm just done at this point. I'm exhausted. I was like, I can see it there. That's close enough for me. I'm done. If you girls want to go, great. I'm going to park me here. So I just sit down on the beach by myself. I just find a rock to sit on, and I'm just relaxing. And then they kind of realize, okay, yeah, we're not going to make it in time. And so we start making our way back. And on the way back, we get lost again. And then we see fresh bear shit. And everything that we've been told about bears immediately goes out your head the second you see fresh, giant bear shit. Because you're thinking, right, what bears do they have here? Is it the ones where you're supposed to make lots of noise and let them know you're around? Or is it the ones where you're supposed to be really quiet? And I immediately said, girls, you haven't got any food in your bags, have you? No, we haven't got anything. Okay, good. Right, so I said, but if we can see that, then it can definitely smell and see us. So calmly as we could, we just went really quiet then, you know, we're just like really quiet, slowly making our way back as quickly as we can. And eventually we get through the forest bit, and the time is like, we are so late now at this point. And of course, if you're late back to the ship, officially, if you miss the ship in the port, you get fired, you get sent home. You have to make your way at your own expense to the next port of call, and then your bags will be waiting for you and you'll be sent home. And so this is my, first day off? So I'm not really wanting to get fired. And I think it was like a late sail that night. But, you know, it's starting to get a little bit darker, and we're just like, this is crazy. We're still trapped in the bloody, you know, you don't realize how stupid you are going out on a hike with knowing nothing about the place you're going to. And as I remember, we finally come through the clearing, and we got to the top of the mountain/hill, and we could see the road and we could see the ship. But again, that's still like maybe another half hour, 45 minutes. And so I remember just celebrating. I remember take a picture. I was doing my Rocky pose when we got to the bottom of the hill, and then my leg cramped up and I literally fell over in the next picture. And we've literally got those two pictures, one with me with my hands up in silhouette from behind, and then one of me falling over on the floor. And I remember Adina, she was supposed to be on shift in the photo gallery, so she just literally starts running to make it back to the ship on time. But I mean, and I just remember saying to Amanda, I was like, and I said, she said, I just remember at the end, Adina was worried about making it back in time for work. Amanda was worried about making it back to the ship before the ship left. I was just worried about not getting mauled by a bear and getting back to the ship.
It sounds like the making of a movie. While you were telling that, for some crazy reason, I started thinking about the new movie
Cocaine Bear.
Bear. Have you seen it?
Yeah, opening night. Yeah. Well, luckily we didn't see any bears, and thankfully they weren't on cocaine. So
Now, Neil, before we let you go, we're going to put you to work. Please announce the winner of a copy of either The Joy of Cruising or Cruising Interrupted.
Well, the winner for this podcast is Ebony Lawrence.
Congratulations to Ebony. Ebony is a member of the Joy of Cruising podcast Facebook group, and so I will follow up with her after this airs. Neil, your feature in the Joy of Cruising again, which was so much fun to interview you for and to write, and as I mentioned, it only covers your first contract. I would love to have you back and take us through the ensuing years that you spent at sea. So I know it will be a lot of fun. So I'll circle back to you and talk about availability. Thank you for joining us on the Joy of Cruising podcast, and continued best wishes with We Needed Roads podcast.
It's been a pleasure, Paul. Can't wait to do it again sometime.
All righty. You take care, and the book is coming out soon, and the whole world will be able to see when you were zip lining right above some alligators. All right, take care.
Joy of Cruising and Cruising Interrupted can be ordered at the link on the joyofcruisingpodcast.com, each for $16.99 plus shipping. Order the soon-to-be-released The Joy of Cruising Again, also at the joyofcruisingpodcast.com for $18.99. For each of the 3 books, use the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast and get $4 off. Again, the discount code Joy of Cruising Podcast. Enter to win a copy of The Joy of Cruising or Cruising Interrupted while supplies last at thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com by joining the Joy of Cruising Podcast Facebook group or both to increase your chance to win. A winner will be announced on each show. Please leave us a review and tell a friend about us. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed the brief escape to the ocean. See you next week. Exciting news, passenger cruisers. The Joy of Cruising Again book was just released. Order the ebook at your favorite online retailer. The paperback can be ordered by copying the web address listed at the podcast website, www.thejoyofcruisingpodcast.com. Don't forget to use the coupon code Joy of Cruising Podcast to get $4 off. We think you'll enjoy the new book as much as Paul enjoyed writing it, and we would love to hear your comments at the Joy of Cruising Again Facebook page or at the Joy of Cruising Instagram page. Thank you.